Chapter 24 of Streams to the River, River to the Sea, a novel of Sacagawea by Scott Odell. The next day and the next, we changed our camp 3 times. The thundering water kept the men awake at night. So we moved back 2 miles. Then the canoes were swamped by the tides in the bay where we camped. At the 3rd camp, wood and water were scarce. Captain Clark named the place Cape Disappointment. Of all our troubles, rain was the worst. It rained night and day, gently or hard. It never stopped. Our clothes, our moccasins, our blankets, which were worn from the long journey, began to rot, and we had no hides to make new ones. Some of our troubles were the natives. They called themselves Clatsops. When they were babies, their mothers put their heads between 2 boards. In this way, as they grew up, their faces widened and their heads flattened, so that their heads and foreheads were in a straight line. It made me shudder to think of Miko's head flattened out between 2 boards. The Clatsops dressed in strange clothes. Captain Clark said that they had bought the clothes from the white men who sailed up and down the shore in ships many times larger than our largest canoe. The Clatsops traded otter pelts for coats. That did not fit. Satin breeches too long for their legs, wool hats too big or too small for their heads. They stole things right under your nose while you were looking at them. They were greedy besides. Captain Clark offered one of them his watch and handkerchief, a bunch of red beads, and a piece of silver money. All of these things for 1 otter skin. The man shook his head. He wanted also a handful of blue beads. Captain Clark told him to leave the camp and not come back. The man and his wife left, but on the way the wife picked up a tomahawk. They ran into the woods and hid. Captain Clark went looking for them, but never found them. When he came back, he was out of breath, but not angry. He said, "They've been trading with men from the American ships and learned some of their tricks. I don't blame them too much." We moved from this camp because game was scarce and hordes of fleas lived in our blankets. Before we moved, Captain Clark carved some words on a pine tree. First, he chopped the thick bark away with a hatchet. Then he drew the words with a piece of charcoal on the clean place he had made. With a knife, he carved out the words. It took him a long time. When he was done, I asked him what the words said. William Clark, December 3rd, 1805. By the land from U States in 1804 and 1805. He read, very pleased with himself. He held out his hands. They were covered with blisters. "I would carve your name if I could hold the knife any longer," he said. "You came, too, all the way from Fort Mandan. Aren't you proud of yourself?" I did not answer. Was he proud of me? That was all that mattered in the world. "We could never have done it without you, Janie," he said. My heart beat loud enough to hear. "Your name belongs there, right beside mine," he said, and he kissed me. That night, when everyone was asleep, I found the knife and a candle that went to the pine tree. The first word he had taught me to write was my name. There was a space just below everything he had carved. In it, by the light of the candle, I chopped out the word Janie as best as I could. In the morning light, it looked crude, not so nice as the words he had carved out, yet it could be read. I doubt that he ever knew about it, for we moved that day, but I knew that my name was there beside his. We moved across the river to a place the men had built. It was called Fort Clatsop, a stockade 16 strides square. It had 3 cabins facing 4 cabins and an open space between them. Life was better here. Our clothes got a chance to dry out, and there were fewer fleas and mosquitoes. But food was still scarce, though our hunters went out every day. For a long time, we mostly ate the same things as the Clatsops ate. Roots of the fern, rush, sweet licorice, and thistle. The men caught a beaver in their traps, and we feasted on fat beaver tail. I chewed up a piece and felt it and fed it to Miko. He liked it as much as I did. He smiled, wanting more. A friendly Clatsop and his 4 wives came to the fort and brought us a basket filled with the fat of an enormous fish. A fish as big as the fort had perished on the shore nearby. Our men thought this fish tasted like dog meat. Not having tasted dog meat, I cannot say. The captain decided to go down to the shore with some of their men and bring back a load of fat. I wanted to see this enormous fish very much. Besides, since we reached the mouth of the river, I had never laid my eyes on the sea. The men had talked about it since the day we left the Minotaurs. I had almost drowned in the waves the sea made. I had heard it and smelled it, but never in all those days had I stood and looked at the sea and shown it to my baby. I asked if I could go with them. Captain Lewis eyed the cradle board on my back. "You and the baby?" he said. "I can leave the baby with his father." Charbonneau had told me already that he was not going to go on a long walk and carry a heavy load of fish fat around on his back. They not hire Charbonneau for carry fat, he said. Hire him for guide. Anyhow, Charbonneau's feet, they have more blisters than toes. Captain Lewis said, "Your husband and I have had a talk. He's decided to go with us, so you can't leave the baby with him." "I can carry the baby," I said. "I have carried him for many sleeps, far away from Fort Mandan to this place." Captain Clark said, "Come, I'll carry Pump." I gave him the baby and the cradle board, which he strapped to his back, and we started off. We climbed to the top of the hill. I could hear waves pounding on the shore. The big water, the great water, the sea lay below us, but I could not find it because of the mist. Clatsops had made a trail to the shore, but it was very steep, and we had to hold on to bushes as we went down one step at a time. We met a band of Clatsops coming up from the shore with loads on their back. We came to a wide sandy shore, much like the shores along the Missouri River, except the sand was much wider. I stopped and peered, looking for the big sea. I saw nothing except swirling mist, but as I walked farther down the shore, water curled up around my legs and drew back. Then more water came up and drew back. At last, here's the sea you've heard about. How does it feel? Captain Clark asked me. Very cold, I said, and took a mouthful. How does it taste? Very bad, I said, getting rid of it. The tide runs in it and runs out. Out where? Around the world. World? That's a new word for me. I've never heard world before. What does it mean? It means the place where we live, here, all around us, and beyond, the streams and rivers, hills and mountains, meadows and prairies, the great lake, the sea that lies before you, and many other seas just like it beyond here. The world is round just like a prickly pear, and it spins like the tops children play with. My head spun too. I saw a picture of the land and the streams and the rivers, the big waters, the sea going on and on, but I could not see things, all of them, in a round ball like a prickly pear spinning round and round. Sun broke through the mist. I saw rocks covered with brown weeds. Water washed over them, and the weeds trailed out and glistened. Among the weeds were animals lying on their backs. Sea otter, Captain Clark said. The Clatsops kill them and sell their pelts to the white traders. Beyond the rocks, fish were swimming about, diving and coming up. They were blue and flashed in the sun. I asked Captain Clark what kind of fish acted like that, like children playing a game. Dolphins, he said. They are not fish, I'm told by Captain Lewis, and they don't have fur, so the Indians don't kill them. Tired of answering my questions and fearing more, I guess he handed me the cradle board, turned away, ran down the beach, and disappeared. Water was washing against my legs. I scooped up some of it and washed my face and Miko's face. Then I took him out of the cradle board and let him stumble around in the water, which he tried to drink. I raised my hands. I said a prayer to the Great Spirit who ruled over everything, over the great sea that went on and on forever, over the world that spun and spun. The chieftain we passed on the trail had stopped with his woman halfway up the cliff. He pointed up the beach to let me know where Captain Clark was and called down a jumble of class-stop words. The women put down their blankets. The chieftain called again. The women picked up their blankets. The chieftain waved, and they all went up the trail laughing. I should have known from their laughter what I would find. When I followed Captain Clark's tracks around a bend, I found him and his men staring at a strange sight. It was as huge as a long house. It looked like a chieftain's house that is just being built, when only the bare poles show. It was the enormous fish. The Clatsops had stripped to clean. Only bones and a great gaping jaw were left. All the camp looked toward a day they called Christmas. Christmas morning. There were songs and shots from the cannon, and 12 twists of tobacco were divided. But we had little to feast on, just some spoiled elk, pounded fish, and small helpings of a black root the Clatsops said was Shananakik. That night, Drewer sat by the fire and told stories about what he had seen and done. Some of the men were hard to believe, like the story about the time he was riding down among the Spanish peaks in the winter where it had snowed for 80 days, and in most places the snow was 80 feet deep. I was riding along over the treetops, he said, and after a while I came to a canyon where there wasn't any snow. And when I crossed over to the other side, I came to a valley where grass was growing green and there were green leaves on the trees. His face was serious. It seemed like a good place to camp, he went on, still looking serious. I was hungry. Sitting up on the limb of a tree, I saw a fat partridge. So I brought up my gun and shot him right through the eye. The bird fell off the limb and broke into a dozen pieces, fell in the grass, and the grass broke into pieces. I went down to the stream to drink, and the water was stone. I saw some raspberries growing, but I broke my teeth when I went to eat them. They were rubies. I thought I would make a fire and got out my axe and chopped on the log. But the log was hard, like the water, and I smashed the axe. I was in a stone forest for certain. What did you do with the rubies? Sergeant Ordway asked. Gave them to some Spanish girls, Drewer said. I was young and foolish in those days. Wish I had the rubies now. They were as big as plums. Captain Clark smiled. Big as plums? Bigger, Drewer said, his face still serious. And a sack full up right to the top. The men laughed, but I didn't. I wondered if there could be such a place somewhere in the Spanish peaks. I thought of the great waters that went on and on around the world, and the mountain cave where the Great Spirit dwelt, and other things too.